There is a person standing on a subway platform. The train has not arrived yet, but the noise is already there. The metallic screech of brakes in the tunnel, the layered murmur of 100 conversations, the electric hum of the rails, the blunt thud of automatic doors. The person reaches into a pocket, pulls out a pair of headphones, places them over their ears, and presses a button. The world does not disappear entirely, but it pulls back. It becomes manageable. That small, almost unconscious gesture carries centuries of history that almost no one ever stops to trace. The silence that person just built for themselves is not natural. It is the result of a chain of problems, solutions, failures, and discoveries that began long before electricity existed, long before anyone thought to place a speaker inside a padded cushion. It began the day cities became too loud to ignore. For most of human history, noise was intermittent. There were periods of intense work and periods of genuine quiet. Medieval markets were chaotic, yes, but they had edges. You could walk away. The countryside was close. Cities were small and noise had a human scale. All of that changed with the Industrial Revolution, and it changed fast. By the middle of the 19th century, cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Pittsburgh had transformed into machines of sound production. Foundries ran without pause. Mechanical looms generated a constant roar that workers described as something physical, something that entered through the bones. Horse traffic over cobblestones produced a low, unrelenting noise that London residents of the time compared to the permanent rumble of a distant storm. Arthur Schopenhauer, living in Frankfurt around the middle of that century, wrote an entire essay against the noise of coachmen cracking their whips, and called it a deliberate torture inflicted on people capable of thought. The philosopher was irritated, certainly, but he was also recording something real. For the first time in history, urban noise had become a recognizable problem, something that demanded attention. The first attempts at a solution were primitive and often absurd. In some European cities, pavement in front of hospitals and courthouses was covered with straw or sawdust to muffle the sound of hooves. It was a fix as local as it was useless at any larger scale. Others proposed time restrictions on heavy traffic. Some municipalities banned certain types of bells or signaling devices in residential areas. None of these measures touched the root of the problem because the root was structural. Industrial cities had been designed to produce, not to inhabit. The most lasting response came not from governments, but from builders. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, architects and engineers began treating sound as a design variable. Not something decorative or optional, but a technical problem with technical solutions. The physicist Wallace Clement Sabine is the name that appears in every textbook on architectural acoustics, because he was the first to treat the behavior of sound within a space as something measurable and predictable. In 1895, Harvard University asked him to fix the problem with fog auditorium, a hall where speeches were unintelligible because sound bounced chaotically for several seconds. Sabine spent entire nights measuring reverberation times using seat cushions borrowed from other rooms, moving them around, comparing results. What he discovered was that sound absorption could be calculated, that there was a mathematical relationship between the volume of a space, the materials covering its surfaces, and the time it took for sound to fade. That equation, which still bears his name, became the foundation of modern acoustics. But Sabine's work was for concert halls and auditoriums. The average city dweller still lived in buildings with thin walls where the upstairs neighbor was a constant sonic presence. The next leap came from materials. Through the first half of the 20th century, the construction industry developed a range of compounds designed specifically to interrupt the transmission of sound. Rock wool, fiberglass, air gaps between walls, specialized seals on window and door frames. These materials did not work by absorbing sound the way Sabine's cushions did. They worked by blocking it, by creating barriers that sound could not easily cross. The distinction matters because it defines two different philosophies of silence: one that catches sound inside a space and dissolves it, and one that simply prevents it from entering. The problem with architectural insulation is that it requires money, planning, and permanence. It is a solution for buildings, not for people in motion. And the cities of the 20th century were cities of motion. The train, the streetcar, the automobile, the airplane. Modern life played out largely in transit, in shared and noisy spaces where no wall of rock wool could follow anyone. The portable solution arrived by a path no one had originally intended for that purpose. The first headphones were not designed for private music listening. They were designed for telephone use. In the late 19th century, telephone operators used single-ear receivers, and it quickly became clear that these were uncomfortable and limited the hands of whoever wore them. In 1910, an engineer and amateur musician named Nathaniel Baldwin built a prototype two-channel headset in his kitchen in Utah that rested over both ears and left the hands free. The United States Navy ordered 100 units without ever visiting his workshop, because the device outperformed everything else available. Baldwin, notably, had no head for business and eventually went broke, but his basic design survived and became the standard for military communications for decades. The shift toward everyday mass use was gradual. Through the 1940s and 50s, headphones were professional tools, used by pilots, radio operators, sound engineers. Music was listened to through speakers, in shared spaces, as a collective experience. The idea that each person could have their own personal soundtrack was technologically possible but culturally foreign. That changed in 1979 with an object that transformed the relationship between people and sound in a way that very few technological innovations have managed. The Sony Walkman was not the first portable cassette player, but it was the first to understand that the product was not the device, but the experience. Masaru Ibuka, co-founder of Sony, wanted to listen to opera on long flights without disturbing anyone. He asked his engineers to adapt an existing cassette recorder so that it only played back, without recording, and was small enough to fit in a pocket. The result was a device that sold 50,000 units in its first 2 months in Japan and permanently changed the way people inhabited public spaces. With the Walkman came something new: the ability to build a personal sound bubble inside a noisy, shared space. It was no longer necessary to wait until you got home to listen to music. It was no longer necessary to passively accept the sounds of your surroundings. The person on the subway, on the bus, walking down the street, could now carry their own sonic world with them. This had cultural consequences that are still being debated. On one hand, it dramatically expanded individual autonomy in public spaces. On the other, some critics pointed out that it created forms of social disconnection, that people wearing headphones became less approachable, less present in shared space. The technology kept moving in the same direction. CD players, the first MP3 devices, the iPod, the smartphone, each generation compressed more music into less space and made it more accessible. But the most significant recent leap was not in the playback device itself, but in the headphones. Active noise cancellation is a technology that does not simply block sound physically the way passive insulation does. It neutralizes sound electronically. A microphone captures the surrounding noise, a processor generates an exactly opposite sound wave, and the result is silence. It is a solution rooted in the physics of waves, but its impact feels almost philosophical. It means that silence can be actively manufactured from noise. that the absence of sound can be the outcome of adding sound. This technology was originally developed in the 1980s by engineer Amar Bose, founder of the company bearing his name, as a solution for commercial airline pilots who suffered hearing fatigue from the constant engine noise on long flights. Bose spent more than a decade arriving at a product that actually worked and could be sold. When it finally reached the mass consumer market in the early 2000s, active noise cancellation stopped being a privilege of cockpits and became something anyone could wear on a subway platform. The result of this entire journey is that silence has become a designed product. Not in any dismissive sense of artificial or fake, but in the sense that it requires intention, engineering, and resources. Natural silence still exists, but in contemporary cities it is scarce and unevenly distributed. Those with money can purchase it in the form of well-insulated housing, high-end headphones, private offices lined with sound-absorbing panels. Those without it live in sonic environments defined by others. That person on the platform who pressed a button to make the world step back is using the product of 150 years of engineering, physics, industrial design, and cultural choices. The gesture is simple. The chain that made it possible, as almost always, is nearly infinite.